Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Trump says he's not speaking to Iran and isn't offering the country anything. Meanwhile, on home soil, the US Senate begins its big, beautiful bill vote-a-rama. Israeli military order mass evacuations as President Trump calls for a Gaza ceasefire deal. Russia fires more than 100 drones into Ukraine overnight. Kyiv claimed Putin has lost more than 1 million troops since the start of the invasion. And back on court, tennis champion Carlos Alcaraz defends his title at day one of Wimbledon. US President Donald Trump has said he's not offering Iran anything, nor is he talking to them following the US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. That's despite previous suggestions that talks between Washington and Tehran would take place following a ceasefire agreement between Iran and Israel. Trump re-emphasized the United States' obliteration of the nuclear facilities after an early intelligence report suggested the strikes may have only set the program back by months. Meanwhile, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency has told CBS Iran will have the capacity to begin enriching uranium again in just a matter of months. Take a listen.
It is clear that there has been severe damage, but it's not total damage, first of all. And secondly, Iran has the capacities there, industrial and technological capacities. So if they so wish, they will be able to start doing this again. This is, again, and I'm sorry, fourth time we have to go back to the table and have a technically sound solution to this. Otherwise, this will come hit us again.
We can now go live to Washington to speak to former US Deputy Special Envoy Ellie Cohanim. Ellie, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. I just want to pick up on that sound we heard from the chief of the UN's nuclear watchdog. He said Iran could begin enriching uranium again in months. Those comments were made yesterday. What do you make of that?
Leigh-Ann, it's wonderful to be back with you as always. Look, you know, I think from the IAEA's perspective, from Rafael Grossi's perspective, it's certainly his job to want to go back on Iranian soil, inspect the damage, get as much access as is possible, and survey where Iran's program stands as far as they're concerned. But I have to say that we know that Israel and the United States, they've had eyes on Iran's nuclear program for so many years. In fact, the Pentagon shared with the world that for 15 years they had been designing exactly the bomb that would be capable of destroying an underground facility like Fordo. So I also have confidence in both the US and Israel, and knowing that they would not rest if they didn't feel comfortable that Iran's nuclear program were obliterated, as President Donald Trump has said multiple times. And Leigh-Ann, I want to say also additionally, we heard from President Trump in an interview this week on US News that should the Iranians restart their nuclear program, he would strike again.
And Ellie, President Trump has previously said his administration was entering talks with Iran. He's now rolled back on that statement. So will he or won't he enter negotiations? It does seem unclear at this stage.
Well, what we do know is that the ceasefire between Iran and Israel was negotiated successfully by the United States, by the Trump administration. And so certainly there was that amount of talk. Now, the question of what's next for the Iranian regime, the U.S. did have intermediaries. We know that Oman was involved in those talks originally. And so let's hope that the Iranian regime makes smart decisions. Leigh-Ann, I've always said from the beginning of when the Trump administration came back into office that the threat to the Iranians was whether they would read the room right and understand that President Donald Trump is not Barack Obama, he's not Joe Biden. And so every time Donald Trump has given them, the Iranian regime, the opportunity to negotiate in earnest, to come and join the international order, as President Trump suggested that they do in a recent post on Truth Social. Every time that President Trump has given them the opportunity, we haven't seen them really understand that the opportunity is an important one for them to take. So the question really stands of whether the Iranian regime is ready to reform their behavior so that they'll behave like a normal nation state.
And we have actually heard from Iran. They're demanding that the US rules out any further strikes before agreeing to further negotiations, Ellie. You've touched on it there, but is this why President Trump isn't committing to talks, because of the possibility of further US strikes?
Well, we've heard President Trump say in the past that the Iranians don't hold the cards. And, you know, in terms of a negotiation, in terms of their international relations and diplomacy, the Iranian regime right now has very little in their corner. I mean, they are just hanging on by a thread right now. And it seems like the only reason why any of the regime officials are in power today is because they've been left in power. So it's amusing to me when they make these kinds of demands. I think it's really for their own domestic audience and trying to maintain some legitimacy in their own population after the country assesses the damage that was wrought upon them because of this regime's ideology and the bad choices that they've made.
And Ellie, I just want to switch gears slightly. What did you make of the chant "Death to the IDF" from a punk band at the Glastonbury Festival in the UK over the weekend? It's been a very controversial issue. It's been dominating a lot of the media landscape.
Well, it was horrific for all of us to see such anti-Semitic language and behavior at what's supposed to be an entertainment event. It was appalling, and it was also appalling that the BBC decided to broadcast this. Many people are comparing that what took place at that concert to something like a Nazi rally. And the United States has taken strong action already. We've been hearing from the U.S. State Department that they are going to be canceling the visa of this so-called artist and this musician who led these chants. And also we saw in news in the U.S. today that the talent agency that had this person signed on has apparently canceled his contract. So I can tell you, maybe this behavior is there's appetite for it in the United Kingdom. There is no acceptance of this kind of anti-Semitism in the United States.
And Ellie, just one more topic. Let's turn our focus to the big, beautiful bill. The Democrats are trying to exploit the infighting in the Republican Party by offering amendments so that Senate Republicans have to put their views on record. Are you worried about the damage that this could inflict on the Republican Party by the midterms?
I'm not worried at all, Leigh-Ann, because most of what's in the big, beautiful bill are President Trump's signature issues that he campaigned on in the 2024 election. That's why you have so much of his own personal commitment, and even Vice President J.D. Vance, who went over to Capitol Hill to get, congressional members in line and in order behind this bill. And so there's a huge mandate for everything that we're seeing in this, including enforcement of the Border Patrol, adding ICE agents, staff, the military spending, which will increase our spending by at least $150 billion. including support for the Golden Dome, the anti-ballistic missile system that President Trump has been advocating for. And so there's, tax cuts. There's a lot in the bill that, again, are President Trump's issues that he campaigned on. And so I think that there is a lot of support for it. Certainly there are individual Republicans that have taken issue with certain individual pieces of the legislation. But my forecast is that this bill will get through both houses of Congress and it will wind up on President Trump's desk for his signature.
Ellie Cohanim, a former U.S. Deputy Special Envoy. It's always a pleasure to have you on and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann.
Now, Israel has told residents in northern Gaza to evacuate ahead of intensified military action. Hours before U.S. President Donald Trump's calls for a ceasefire, at least 86 people were killed across Gaza by Israeli strikes. Trump previously said he was hopeful a peace deal in Gaza could be agreed in the next week. We can now speak to Daniel Rubenstein from the Israeli Forces, a spokesperson unit and former advisor to the Prime Minister Netanyahu. Daniel, a pleasure to have you on the show. As mentioned at the top there, at least 86 people were killed across Gaza, and that was over the weekend. And I just wanted to ask you, the military today issued mass evacuation orders in northern Gaza. What exactly are you hoping to achieve with further strikes? And also, just how many more lives are expected to be lost in this campaign by Israel?
Thank you for having me. I think we're at a key turning point in this war. For almost 2 years, the Hamas terrorist army has been fighting this war in order to remain alive and in order to keep hostages so that it can carry out more massacres like it did on October the 7th. We're at a key point because Hamas is in a position to make a decision. Does it want this war to continue, or will it lay down its arms and release the hostages in exchange for safe passage out of Gaza? In the meanwhile, Hamas has given every indication that it wants to continue to fight. Israel does not want to have a single non-combatant casualty in Gaza, but unfortunately, Hamas continues to fight from densely populated areas in Gaza, and that makes fighting the Hamas terrorist army quite a slow and difficult task that must be done with great care. But unfortunately, Hamas has left us with no choice. Hamas is walking distance from the Israeli villages that it attacked on October 7th. It remains in control of significant areas of Gaza, and it's time for the whole world to speak with one voice and say that for the sake of Israelis and Palestinians alike, Hamas must lay down its weapons and let this war end.
Hamas has obviously said that they're not prepared to do that, but Israel is intensifying its bombardment of Gaza as the US president is really pushing for a ceasefire deal. Is Israel currently in ceasefire talks with Hamas and US mediators? What's the situation there?
I have seen reports that there are negotiations ongoing, whether they are in Cairo or whether they are in Doha, Qatar, where Hamas leaders are living quite comfortably. Negotiations are always taking place, whether behind the scenes or openly. And I'm hoping that these negotiations lead to an end to this war, which has gone on for more than 600 days. It has gone on for far too long, but the Hamas terrorist army remains the government of Gaza and is promising to continue to carry out more massacres of Israelis if it gets the opportunity. So that's why it's so important for the whole world, including the United States, including the European Union, including Qatar, including Egypt, to speak with one voice and say the way that this war ends is if Hamas stops fighting.
Various reports from Israeli strikes over the weekend say children and family were killed in a strike on Al-Mawasi, which is a so-called safe zone. Daniel, is Israel following international law and actually taking precautions to mitigate civilian harm? Are they trying to protect the civilians? Because there are various reports coming out from all different platforms, plus aid groups that are still in Gaza, that it's civilians taking the brunt of these attacks. Do you recognize that that is happening?
The answer to your first question is yes. Israel is following international humanitarian law in its war in Gaza, and that shows itself in a variety of ways. First is distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants. Israel wants to target Hamas fighters who are promising to carry out more massacres in Israel. These Hamas fighters are dressed exactly like the non-combatants. They have dug tunnels underneath residential areas. They have firing positions everywhere. It is a very difficult task, but Israel is committed to making every possible effort to distinguish between the Hamas fighters and the non-combatants. It also means that Israel is willing to send massive amounts of humanitarian aid into Gaza via the approved channels that do not reach the Hamas terrorist army, because it is this Hamas army that has been taking the international aid that generous donors have provided in the past. They control the distribution of this aid, they tax it, and they use this money to recruit new fighters, to fund the people who are holding hostages, and to prolong the war. So Israel is doing everything possible within international humanitarian law to fight this just war justly.
Okay, let's pick up a little bit on that and the aid situation. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said the US-backed aid operation in Gaza is inherently unsafe, Daniel, saying it is killing people. This is strong words from the head of the UN. He says the United Nations says more than 400 people have been killed trying to seek aid from GHF operations. 11 today, according to reports. So he also said the search for food must never be a death sentence. Something appears to be going wrong here, and I don't know what it is, but daily reports, people are going to the GHF sites. They are being killed as they're receiving aid. I've spoken to many doctors inside of Gaza myself, because foreign journalists aren't allowed in, and they've said to me, Leigh-Ann, these are not warning shots. People are being shot in the shoulders and the head as they are starving, just looking for any form of food. So is Israel really trying to help these people and get aid to them?
I share your concern. No one who comes to receive aid in Gaza from the designated points should be harmed, not from the Israeli side and not from the Palestinian side. It has been widely reported that Hamas is deeply unhappy with this effort to bypass Hamas's control of humanitarian aid in Gaza. Hamas has called for the death of people who are providing the aid and people who are going to collect it. I do not know the circumstances of every instance in which people are killed, but I very much hope that we can distinguish between the Hamas combatants, who should be nowhere near these aid distribution points, and non-combatant Palestinians who are coming to get food for their family. We want this war to end as quickly as possible. The fastest way to end it is to ensure that Hamas does not have the money to keep funding it. And the aid distribution program that the United Nations Secretary General is advocating for is in effect to send massive shipments of food and supplies into territory governed by Hamas so that Hamas can take it and use the money to fund its war. That is a non-starter. What the United States and Israel have done is unprecedented in urban combat. It is an attempt to separate the civilian non-combatant population from the Hamas fighters. And Hamas needs to allow people from within its territory to safely receive aid without threatening to kill people who are providing the aid.
Okay, Daniel, I know that the UN, who I've spoken to, will completely disagree with that sentiment from you. They say they have all the connections. They know how to distribute aid. They've been doing it for years, and GHF is coming in as a military. But let's just park that for the moment, because I do hear you. I just want to ask you before I let you go, what did you make of the chant, "Death to the IDF," from a band at Glastonbury Festival over the weekend?
I think the chants of death to the IDF are a symptom of a much wider problem, which is that it has become increasingly popular and acceptable to chant slogans that call for the elimination of Israel, whether it's "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," or it's "free Palestine," or now it's "death to the IDF." There is far too much anti-Israel, anti-Jewish hostility in popular culture. It is encouraging Hamas to prolong this war. Hamas hears these people in Western countries who are calling for death to Israel, death to Israeli soldiers. I think what we need is peace. We need peace for everyone, life for everyone in this region, Israeli and Palestinian, Muslim, Jewish, Christian. We can do much better than what we have been doing. We hope that this war will end soon and we can move on and build a better future for everyone in this region.
Daniel Rubenstein from the Israeli Forces Spokesperson Unit and former advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Always appreciate your insights. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. A man in northern Idaho opened fire on firefighters, killing 2 and wounding another in what officials say was a planned ambush. The attack happened on Sunday near Canfield Mountain, shortly after the man started a wildfire in the area. Authorities found the suspect's body and a weapon in nearby woods. His identity and motive remain unknown. Denmark is making military service mandatory for women for the first time as Europe faces security concerns over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Previously, only men were drafted and women could volunteer, but starting from next year, 18-year-old women will enter the same draft lottery as men. Officials say this will boost troop numbers and strengthen NATO. Canada has dropped a new tax on US tech giants, aiming to restart trade talks after President Trump criticized the move. The measure would have charged companies like Amazon and Google 3% on their Canadian sales. This comes as the two countries work to improve trade ties. And China's national soccer team may be struggling, but AI-powered robots are making headlines. 4 university teams played 3-on-3 matches with fully autonomous humanoid robots in Beijing. Tengsheng University won 5-3 in the final. Organizers say they aim to develop safe AI, hoping robots may one day play alongside humans. Now, Russia has lost 1 million troops since the start of the war against Ukraine. That's according to Kyiv's general staff. Last week, Russian President Vladimir Putin said he was willing to hold a new round of peace talks with Ukraine. However, last night, Moscow fired 107 drones into Ukraine, hitting Donetsk and Kharkiv. We can now go live to Moscow to speak to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, pleasure to have you on the show. Ukraine reports Russia has lost over 1 million troops since the start of the invasion. What is Moscow's response to that?
Well, there's been no official response from the Russian side to those claims. That actually the last time that the Russian authorities have revealed the number of the Russian irreversible losses in the so-called special military operation in Ukraine was in September 2022, almost 3 years ago. Back then, the Russian president said that number was about 6,000 Russian soldiers. And exactly a year ago, the Russian president has said that the ratio of the Russian irreversible losses and Ukrainian irreversible losses is 1-to-5, so that the assumption in Moscow is that Ukraine is losing 5 times more soldiers than Russia. And the understanding in Moscow is that Russia is helping the sanitary losses of the Russian military by supplying them with all the necessary medical help afterwards. And now we are actually hearing more and more about that. But also interesting numbers that have been quoted by the Russian media outlets. outlets that were saying that there was the UN Human Rights Commissioner's report, which was suggesting that the Ukrainian military have executed at least 26 Russian military who have been in prison in Ukraine ever since February 2022. So it is unclear what number Russia has lost in its special military operation in Ukraine, but the Russian authorities are trying to make it clear to the Russian population that those are much smaller and those are needed because of the goals of that operation that Moscow is leading in Ukraine.
Over the weekend, Russia launched its biggest aerial attack against Ukraine, which included 477 drones and 60 missiles. Dasha, does this dash hopes of a breakthrough in peace negotiations?
Well, what we are hearing from the Russian authorities is that Moscow is willing to hold negotiations with Ukraine. They have exchanged the memoranda, which are completely different in the essence. The Russian delegation and the Ukrainian delegation have been compiled two separate documents, and Moscow says they are trying to melt these two documents into something they can both work on looking forward. But at the same time, what Moscow is saying is that in the absence of the progress on the diplomatic front, Russia has nothing left to do but to continue to fight militarily, and that means to diminish the military potential of the Ukrainian armed forces. Therefore, those strikes that Moscow is carrying out against Ukraine are targeting only the military-industrial complex. At least that's the claim the Russian Ministry of Defense is making constantly, and so do the Russian officials. So in Moscow, the perception is that there has to be the update on the third round of talks between Kiev and Moscow, and the hope is that round will be held sooner rather than later.
And finally, Dasha, the German foreign minister has said Putin's so-called willingness to negotiate is nothing more than a facade, and he wants to sow fear throughout Europe. What more can you tell us?
Well, Moscow insists again that it is Europe that is willing to continue fighting, that is not interested in finding a negotiated settlement. And actually, that was the accusations that Moscow has been making throughout those years of this operation, that Europe has been pushing Ukraine to continue fighting. And even in 2022, when the negotiations were held in Istanbul, there was almost a ready document that would have put an end to the fighting. But it was, again, the European leaders that did not allow Ukraine to do so. So speaking of Europe, Moscow is saying that NATO's increased expenditures on defense are going to cripple the alliance. They are going to destroy it from within. And the Russian president has also been saying that there is no threat coming from Moscow to the European countries. And that was the thing that has been developed by the by the political technologists in the European countries to scare the population, to make sure they spend more on defense from their taxpayers' money. So in Russia, there is perception that Europe will have to come to terms looking forward and at the distant future and rebuild its relationship with Russia. But of course, those are very distant perspectives. And for now, we see the continuation of fighting between Russia and Ukraine and no end in sight to that.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you so much. Now, a severe heat wave across southern Europe has sent temperatures above 46 degrees Celsius in several countries. Spain is one of the hardest hit by the scorching conditions, just as Seville hosts a United Nations summit on financing development. Patrick Falk reports.
In Spain's southern city of Seville, tourists are sweltering in searing temperatures. There's no simple solution for beating the heat.
Yeah. Water and shade, water and shade.
Yeah, so we got up early to enjoy the sights early before the heat got too intense. So.
A heat wave has engulfed swathes of Europe. Red heat warnings are in force across countries including Portugal, Italy and Croatia. Meteorological trackers say Spain is on course for its hottest June on record. Mercury levels hit 46 degrees Celsius, the highest ever seen in the town of El Granada to the west of Seville. For workers exposed, the conditions are unbearable.
It's awful. It makes me collapse. We need to be looking for shade constantly, air conditioning in the car, those who have it. And look, we have these bracelets that ring with all these heat warnings.
Here in the car, we need to be all day with the air conditioning on. As you can see right now, we have the windows closed and the air at 16 degrees, so the car can cool down and clients can be comfortable.
Experts are warning the intense heat could leave children and the elderly vulnerable. Reports say a woman in Barcelona died after completing a shift as a road sweeper over the weekend. Local authorities are investigating her death. The intense heat comes also as Seville hosts a 4-day gathering of the United Nations. One of the key areas of focus, climate justice. Greenpeace members were out in force calling for polluters to pay, some of them holding fans to cope with the searing heat. Forecasters warn some areas in Europe will get hotter until the middle of the week. The heat has been building under a big area of high pressure. Experts link the rising frequency and intensity of heat waves to climate change, although it's hard to connect individual extreme weather events to the phenomenon. Scientists analyzing the influence of climate change on such events say June heat waves with 3 straight days above 28 degrees Celsius are about 10 times more likely to occur now compared to pre-industrial times. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Tesla has activated its first batch of V4 superchargers in China, spanning multiple provinces, and plans to roll out additional stations across the country. These upgraded chargers points will also be open to electric vehicles from other manufacturers, the company has confirmed. A new US-UK trade deal for British car and aerospace exports has come into force today, giving UK car makers access to sell 100,000 vehicles annually to the US at a rate of 10%. In return, the UK will remove duties on US beef and ethanol. Steel and aluminium tariffs remain unresolved and could double if no agreement is reached by the 9th of July. Turning to sport, Paris Saint-Germain defeated Lionel Messi's Inter Milan 4-0 in Atlanta to reach the Club World Cup quarter-finals. PSG dominated early with scoring twice, scoring an own goal and adding a fourth despite Messi's efforts in the second half. Miami couldn't respond. PSG will face Flamengo or Bayern Munich next. And Lando Norris secured a victory at the Red Bull Ring, just 15 points behind McLaren teammate in the Drivers' Championship. With a strong fan support and his own grandstands waiting him at Silverstone, Norris aims to build on his success and claim back-to-back wins at the upcoming British Grand Prix. Now, sticking with sport and the best sport, the nets are up, the sun is out, and the strawberries are being served. Wimbledon has kicked off in southwest London today at the All England Club grass courts, of course. Defending men's champion Carlos Alcaraz has started on day one, as well as woman number one, Aryna Sabalenka. Let's get the latest from sports journalist Joe Morrison. So, Joe, we have been very excited in here. We're watching something on the scores, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Wimbledon, okay, third Grand Slam. Look at what you're wearing. Do you know what? I actually thought of wearing a tennis dress because you always make a statement. I love this outfit.
Well, it was either come like this, Leigh-Ann, or come as a strawberry.
Oh, I would have loved the strawberry. But you didn't bring us any strawberries and cream.
Yes, I know, a punnet.
A punnet,
Why
yes.
are strawberries always in a punnet and nothing else is in a punnet? You never get a punnet of blueberries or a punnet of raspberries.
Do you know what? Maybe that's something for...
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
For people smarter than me to know. But look at you. You look like actually an umpire, and they don't even exist anymore. I could see you in the stands there with David Beckham.
You're talking about the line officials,
yeah.
Well, oh, that's sad, isn't it?
That is sad. But let's get into what's up to you. We can talk about the line officials later. But Wimbledon, okay, third Grand Slam of the year. You dressed for the occasion. You look absolutely great.
Thank you, Leigh-Ann.
And we're coming back off that epic final that I just couldn't take my eyes off. Alcaraz and Sinner, French Open, something of mastery. And we're seeing a new tennis rivalry kind of emerge in the men's singles. And I was going to ask you all about Alcaraz, but let's actually say he's struggling a little bit here.
He's wobbling.
He's wobbling.
He's wobbling. What is it? Is it all square yet?
No, he's wobbling against Fognini,
Yeah.
Italian, old school. He's not as young as Alcaraz. We've known him on the tour for a while. But they are 2 sets each. They're now into the 5th set. Alcaraz is 3-0 up. But 3-love up. But Fognini actually won the 4th set 6-2. And we're now, what's happening here?
You know what I think? The heat. The heat, the humidity, I think is going to throw a few side balls into the equation this year. I don't think it's going to be a traditional Wimbledon in the sense of, the favourites are going to go, romp to the final and they're going to meet each other in the final. I just don't believe that. I think this week, have you seen the weather forecast in the UK?
It's absolute scorcher.
Hottest first day of Wimbledon in recent memory. I think that's going to cause a problem.
But then...
And it is causing a problem.
It is causing problems. Alcaraz actually said before this, I'm from Spain. I train all the time with these temperatures. It isn't a problem. But when you get to 5 sets, it's got to be pretty...
And it's grass, Leigh-Ann.
Yeah,
it's grass and it's quicker. People talk about, well, the Australian Open's hot, you know, the US Open sometimes is hot. It's played on a different surface.
Absolutely.
You've got to be mobile, and being mobile in the heat is tough.
It is very, very tough. I would agree with that, because we've actually seen Daniel Medvedev out in the first round, 9th seed, Tsitsipas out. So, like you say, we could see Alcaraz out, which will be a big shock. And I want to talk about the Brits, because it's Wimbledon. I mean, it would be rude not to. And, you know, why not? And let's talk about Jack Draper. I'm a massive fan of his, actually. He's world number 4, won Indian Wells, sometimes referred to as a 5th major. His physical appearance, not that we should concentrate on that, but compared to a UFC fighter, he's got a good chance here, especially if we see Alcaraz, Medvedev, you know, the top dominant people on grass out.
But here's the thing, Leigh-Ann. Is he too big? For those reasons that I just talked about before, he's what, 6'4", 6'5"?
Yes, and he's a big guy. He's a big guy.
Now, that mobility that I was talking about, grass getting around the court, it's not just about power on grass, it's about mobility. Is he too big? That's my question.
But then it's also serve and volley. And we saw the likes. Do you remember years ago we had the big Aussie server who used to come in and do really well at Wimbledon, but on
Roddick,
not Roddick.
He was a big...
Philippoussis.
Okay.
You know, he used to come in, serve and volley. So, I don't know, let's put, I don't know, Jack Draper could be really good.
Yeah, look, world number 4, you don't get there. There's no easy ride to get to world number 4. So he has got a chance, but I wonder about his size.
OK, too big, maybe. All right, Emma Raducanu, let's talk about her. Plagued with injury, as always. In the first round today against the young Brit. Oh, God love her. Oh, God love her. So these
bless.
this young Brit, 17, wild card. Gosh, the nerves have to be absolutely raging.
Look, the thing is, I get excited, as you can imagine, every single year for Wimbledon when it comes to the British entries, until they get knocked out. And then you just...
Day 2. No.
There's this huge deflation, you know, instead of the elation on day 1, the sunshine and the strawberries and the punnet and everything that we were talking about. It's, you know, Henman Hill, you're sitting there and...
Murray Mound?
Oh, is it Murray Mound now, is it?
It
used to be Henman Hill.
It used to be called Henman Hill, or Murray Mound, one or the other.
Andy Murray was the only one where you would go, he could go a long way and he may go to the final.
Yeah, I agree
But the other
with that.
Brits over the years, they've always just let us down.
Damp squib.
Damp squib.
Damp squib. But let's hope Emma Raducanu cannot be a damp squib this time round. OK. Now, my all-time favourite is the GOAT, Novak Djokovic. And he's going for his 25th Grand Slam. I mean, he has won 7 Wimbledons. Do you think this is his shot?
Yes.
Oh.
Without question, yes. No doubt. And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because of all those things I referred to, the tournament itself, the speed of grass, and that heat, it requires that, what is it, that wily nature that you need to have, which only comes from experience. What do you do in this scenario? Because remember, they play the games, there's a draw, obviously, who you're going to face next, which then determines what your actual start time is. Well, you can't always guarantee that you're getting a later in the day start time and therefore cooler climbs. You can't guarantee that. And sometimes I think you just need those... Yeah, those smarts, those, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I definitely know. The experience. And Djokovic, I always feel bad because they're like, oh my gosh, he's 38, you know, will he ever make? And I think, gosh, look
We've got
him.
Ronaldo at 40, still
know.
playing. Tom Brady was 40. I'm trying to think. Michael Jordan
absolutely
played basketball
true.
at 40.
I would really love to see Novak Djokovic, you know, make his 25th Grand Slam because he's always been there. I feel like we don't know tennis without Djokovic for a long time. But let's talk about, we touched on it earlier, but no linesman or woman. You know, where's all the fun in that? You can't be serious, McEnroe.
You cannot be serious.
Nick Kyrgios.
Yes.
Let's never forget him. What a character on the court when it came to line calls. But what is going on?
Look, sometimes, Leigh-Ann, the sport is emotion. Sport involves humans. And I think sometimes they forget that. What do you think is going to come next? Umpires. Why do we need the umpire? If you've got all of this technology, why do you need the umpire? So why don't you get rid of the umpire? Then what else comes into it? How far do you go with that? I think it's a hot potato at the moment, not just in tennis, but in all sports. And I'm so glad that the French have pushed back against it and said, no, we'll still have the humans.
Because most tournaments now are dominated by AI. If you look at the Grand Slams, and you could argue it's accuracy, it's more cost efficient. But I agree. I think it's quite sad. You know.
Were you watching it today?
Yes, I was.
It felt weird, didn't it?
It always feels weird
with them not standing there. This was a little bit empty.
I also watched the Dubai Open, and it was all AI. They didn't have the linesmen this year either. And I do remember thinking, oh gosh, I missed that. And I missed like a little chat, or you know how they go off a little bit.
A
That's
word.
What I'd like to see, a little word. I want to do some predictions. I want to know.
Oh, come on, Leigh-Ann, come on.
I know. I feel like, Joe, I think you've got to be realistic. It's the first, I'm going to check the score actually. It's the first round. Lots of tennis to go, but what do you think for the women's and for the men's singles titles?
I'm going to go Sabalenka for the women, so I'm not going to say anything that's...
I actually told him if he didn't say Sabalenka, we weren't going to be friends.
It's true. Sabalenka for the women. However, I'm going to go for Novak Djokovic for the men.
Can I tell you something? I was thinking Alcaraz, but I've just seen this game with Fognini. And my heart wants Djokovic. I'll agree with Djokovic. And I just want Arina Sabalenka to win Wimbledon.
You didn't say Djokovic to me before.
No, I didn't. I did say Alcaraz.
You can't change.
Can I not change? Okay.
What's the latest with Alcaraz?
Alcaraz. Okay, so we're having a look here. Why isn't it?
So Alcaraz, he is wobbling at the moment. This is a big test. If he comes through it, it's a big chance.
Okay.
Is he going to come through it? That's the question.
So right now, it's the same as when we spoke before. I don't know if they've taken a timeout break, but they...
Which they're allowed, by the way, under this new heat rules.
Exactly.
The wet bulb rule, that's what it's called. Did you know that? The wet bulb global temperature rule. That's the Wimbledon measure for the heat.
Wow.
And humidity and all the other things.
That's fascinating. No, I didn't know about that. But actually, I wonder if they have taken a slight time out. I don't know. So don't hate me.
Or the Wi-Fi's gone off.
Yeah, one of the two. But so they 2 sets each, still into the 5th set, and Alcaraz 3-love up in that set. But it looks like something's happened there slightly because the score hasn't changed since we last looked at it. No, nothing's changed.
Give it a whack.
It might be taking your time out. But absolutely fascinating. You know what? Let's see who comes through. But it's going to be really interesting, like you say, because the heat's going to play a massive part in this.
Forecast all this week. High heat, high humidity, first week of Wimbledon fortnight. I think we're going to see some surprises because of that.
No, I agree. Keep hydrated. That's what they say.
I will.
You will. Everyone watching.
And it won't be water.
And sports journalist Joe Morrison. I love having you on the show. Thank you so much. A reminder of our top stories. President Trump says he's not speaking to Iran and isn't offering the country anything. Meanwhile, on home soil, the US Senate begins its big and beautiful vote-a-rama. Israeli military orders mass evacuations as President Trump calls for a Gaza ceasefire deal. Russia fires more than 100 drones into Ukraine overnight. Kyiv claimed Putin has lost more than 1 million troops since the start of the invasion. And back on the tennis court, tennis champion Carlos Alcaraz defends his title at day one of Wimbledon. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. The dressing room is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.